You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the second hour of the More Money Show on WABC. I am your host, Steve Moore. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new to the show, we bring the intersection bring together the intersection of economics and politics and finance, and we like to have some fun on this show as well. The question of the day, if you'd like to call in later, we will be taking your calls. By the way, we are live and in color, unlike almost every other radio station you could turn to where you're just going to get canned information or paid political commercials or, commercials that are boring. We try to have fun. We take your calls almost every weekend. Every once in a while we pre-tape the show, but mostly we go live as we are right now. The question of the day, of course, is this is President's Day weekend. So who's your favorite president? Who is your favorite president? This, of course, is the weekend we celebrate two presidents, of course, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. But I love Reagan. I love Calvin Coolidge. I think we've had so many great presidents. And how about this? He's only been president for 4 weeks and 4 years and 3 weeks. But is Donald Trump, is he going to make the history books? Is he going to be rated as one of our greatest presidents? I know he wants to. He wants to go down in history as one of our greatest presidents. And I have to say, based on what he's done so far in the last 3.5 weeks, Mr. President, I'm with you. I think the American people, there's no question. The polls show Americans are upbeat about what you're doing. You're draining the swamp. You're getting rid of obsolete programs. You're putting more power into the hands of the American people. And one of the things that Donald Trump is talking about is potentially shutting down the U.S. Department of Education and also just sending the money right to the parents so they can send their kids to the best schools, because we have a national emergency with the poor quality, the dismal schools, especially in our inner cities. And the person who knows more about this than anyone I know is my longtime friend, Jeannie Allen, who is an expert on education. She runs a fantastic group called the Center for Education Reform. She is one of the most important voices for school choice in America. Jeannie, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Steve, so much.
So who's your favorite? Who are 2 or 3 of your favorite presidents?
Ronald Reagan is right up there with you in terms of his incredible impact on all of us. And I have to say that I'm also a huge fan of our first, one of the ones we're celebrating this weekend is George Washington. I mean, I think we don't talk enough about him and what he did.
Yes.
You realize it was this weekend that he was at Valley Forge, and we thought the war was not going to turn the American Revolution. His people didn't have shoes on. They were losing their toes. It was frigid cold, and he turned the war that weekend because those folks, those Americans and those men got up and had their adrenaline running, and that's why we have the country we have today.
So true. And so, by the way, Jeannie, good answers. And one of the things I wanted to mention to you and get your feedback on is I saw this poll that was just done of of teachers. I don't know if it was a poll of the teachers or the kids, but basically the finding was that about 35 to 40% of the teachers who are teaching our kids in elementary school and teaching U.S. history have a negative view about America. And I'm sorry, if you have a negative view about America, you shouldn't be teaching our kids United States history.
Yeah, you not only should not be teaching our kids American history or the pablum they now call social studies, but you shouldn't even be in the classroom teaching history unless you actually know something about history.
That's a good point.
I mean, this is our problem over the last 4 decades since Nation at Risk. We have math teachers who don't know math. We have English language arts or reading teachers who actually don't know how to teach that. And it's not their fault, by the way. I love teachers. I want them to succeed. They are doing so much for our kids. They've done so much for me, my kids, your kids. But to put them in the untenable position of saying they're qualified when what they need to do is become an expert in their craft before the classroom, that's how you start changing American education.
Well, that's right. And one of the problems, there's a lot of problems with incidentally, one of my favorite teachers of all time was my high school teacher who taught U.S. history, and he had so much knowledge and he was so excited. I mean, he was such an exciting teacher because he was excited about what he was teaching. He loved America. He loved the story of America, which, as I said to our listeners earlier, is one of the greatest stories of civilization. And,
me too.
What's that?
Me too. In high school, me too. My favorite teacher was Mrs. Feldman. She was American history and American government in Northern Highlands High School in Allendale, New Jersey. And you know what's interesting? She not only got me where I am because it's what made me want to go to Washington, but Steve, the other thing is I didn't know what her politics were. And I was shocked when I went back years later for a reunion to find out she was actually very liberal. But she never let that on. She taught history.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, the best teachers, you don't know what their politics are, and they just give it to you straight. They might give you a little bit of bias because everybody always puts a little bias in what they present. But same thing, Mr. Dickman, who was my teacher in American history. I don't know to this day. I think he kind of leaned left actually, but he was so excited about teaching what he used to call the Katzenjammer kids, the Americans. And I learned so much. And incidentally, this is such an important point, Jeannie. A great teacher is truly worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. And we can make them all great. To use today's phrase of turn, we can make them all great if we allow them the freedom and the flexibility, and we recruit the best and the brightest, and we give them the money, not the administrators and bureaucrats, to actually do the job.
So the problem, as I see it, and you're the expert on this, I'm just an amateur looking at what happens, is that in the public school system, it's almost impossible to get rid of a bad teacher. Right.
Exactly. And even with the unions weakening, which they are over time, there are so many constraints through the contracts. So every union controlled district, which is just about every single one in the country, even states that say the right to work, all that means is they have a master contract. They don't have quote unquote collective bargaining, but they're bound by that. And they are bound by operational restraints, when they can, when they're allowed to talk to students in many cases. But more important than anything else, how they get paid is based on tenure and seniority. Yeah. It's not based on how good they are. And to get rid of them, you have to jump through hoops or be willing to have to go to court.
Yeah, and that's a problem because a bad teacher doesn't belong in a classroom. It's that simple. And they should find another profession, and we should grade teachers just like I get graded in my job, you get graded in your job. Everyone who has a job, you get graded, and if you don't do the job, you get a bonus if you do a good job, and if you don't, you probably need to find another job. It's just so disheartening to me that there are so many teachers who are just kind of punching a time card. And
you know this too, and you've done this over your career, Steve. Whenever you talk to teachers professionally that are really good at what they do, they'll say, I'm getting past people who don't belong let's say in the fourth grade if it's third grade doing math, or I'm trying to do the job, but unfortunately there's someone down the hall that maybe isn't up to it. And by the way, you may not be up to a full-time thing. I mean, and people say, well, when I say this in public, they'll go, well, have you ever tried it? No. And I couldn't, by the way, I would be lousy. Yeah. And so I appreciate the skill and the passion and the commitment. But the reality is maybe there's someone who could teach 20 hours a week history because they're a history professor from another college. Maybe it's a mom who was going back to the workforce and can do 20 hours of support for a school. Like, we don't even need this construct of the full-time teacher over the full-time workload with certain subjects they don't necessarily even love to teach or that they would love more training. Teachers, I wrote a piece years ago, teachers should be entrepreneurs. We should have a system that allows them to hire a multitude of people to do various jobs that they love, and then that makes you want to do better in your work.
So, Jeannie, we just have 2 minutes left. I'm talking to Jeannie Ellen, who's the CEO of the Center for Education Reform. Very quickly, Trump is for school choice, right? Is he doing it?
Trump is for school choice. He issued an executive order, which is fantastic, directing the various departments to find discretionary monies that they could start putting into parents' hands. States are rabid and rapidly passing and enacting new laws. The more, the better. And I think having the president in the bully pulpit pushing this issue, finding ways, as you said earlier, to put the money and the power back in the hands of individuals and not in departments of education, and giving the freedom to people who don't have it, like many other people do, is essential. And I think he's gonna kill it on this.
And last question in our last literally 45 seconds before we have to take a hard break. Should we shut down the Department of Education? I'm kind of undecided about this.
I used to think, me too. I used to be like, well, maybe, is it really a distraction, whatever. The reality is it is so pernicious in what it does. The amount of money that it spends is only 10%, but it's got an incongruous impact on American education. So at least get rid of the programs that don't work, get rid of the money that's in the way, send it back to kids and families, and I think we'll be a lot better off.
Jeannie Ellen, thanks so much for joining us. This is the More Money Show. We'll be right back, folks.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I hope you're all enjoying your President's Day weekend. I've been making the point over the last hour and a half or so that we should be celebrating President's Day because we've had so many great presidents, including two of our greatest, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, whose birthdays we celebrate on Monday. So now I want to bring on two of the smartest guys I know on politics, and they've been friends of mine for, over 30 years. Ralph Reed, who runs the Faith and Freedom Foundation, and John Fund, who we worked together at the Wall Street Journal for, I think, 10 years. John was on the editorial board, as was I, and we also worked together at National Review. He also is one of the writers of the Unleash Prosperity Hotline. By the way, if you're not getting the Unleash Prosperity, why the hell not? Because it's absolutely free. It costs you nothing. And it's the best way to become the smartest person in the room when it comes to finance and politics. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. John Fund, by the way, I want to ask you both. So John, I'll start with you. Who's your favorite president? Who are two or three of the greatest presidents?
Oh, give me two or three. Well, obviously the ones you mentioned, but I would say Ronald Reagan, Calvin Coolidge, and Donald Trump is moving up that list fast.
Wow. Okay, Ralph.
For me, Lincoln is always going to be number one because he saved the Union, and he was the first Republican president and helped build the Republican Party. Reagan, I'm a Reaganite to my core, and I agree with John. I think Trump is, by the time this is done, he's going to be in that top
Well, he wants to be, Ralph. I mean, it's funny because whenever, it's just a quick funny story. When Arthur Laffer and I would go see Trump, and we'd go see him every few months in his first term. We've seen him once or twice, since the election. He was always asking Laffer, Ralph and John, about Reagan. He was fascinated with Reagan. And, it was the old, like, what would Reagan do? And there was a bit of, look, Reagan is a great role model for Trump, right? But I think, guys, that Trump wants to go down in history as an even greater president, Ronald Reagan. I don't know if he can accomplish that, but I don't know, Ralph, you think that's possible?
Well, I think it is possible. I really honestly do, and I'll tell you why. It reminds me of a story about Reagan that both of you may know. I don't know if all your listeners, Steve, know it, but it's a great story. And it's after Reagan had run in 1976 against Gerald Ford and lost. Nobody thought he'd get another bite at the apple. Nobody thought he'd be able to run again. It's amazing now to think this, but he was considered too old. And he was at the time only 65.
Yes.
And he called up one of his top foreign policy advisors, and he said, I'd like for you to come to Bel Air and meet with me. He goes, I've been thinking, and if I run again, I don't want to do this for anything other than a really big reason, and I've been giving a lot of thought to it. And it was Judge William Clark, who later went on to be his national security advisor.
Yes, that's right.
Was very close to him, and he came in to meet with him, and he goes, look, I've got this idea on the Cold War. I want to run it by you. He goes, sure. What is it? He goes, we win. They lose.
Yeah.
He said, what do you think?
Yeah. That goes a lot beyond the old containment. It goes.
See, Steve, that's my point. You see, there was all this conventional wisdom. There was all this conventional thinking of peaceful coexistence, right? And détente and contain them. No, we're not going to contain them. We're going to defeat them. And it was Reagan's ability as a leader and as a visionary to conceptualize a world that others could not see. And I see that in Trump. I honestly do. I'm not a sycophant, but I see it. I see it in the Middle East. I see it in Asia. I see it in his views on the economy. You see it all the time, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's Ralph Reed from Faith and Freedom Foundation. So John Fund, you were a skeptic of Trump's when he first started running, as many people were. Most people were skeptical. But he is, I'm looking at these numbers. It was just reported that, Americans are more optimistic about the economy today, John, than they've been any time in the last 30 years.
Oh, look, measured through the economic lens, Donald Trump is clearly become a powerhouse president. I've known Trump for 42 years, Steve. I do think that despite the fact that he has become much more conservative, his instincts are very good, and he certainly knows how to negotiate. Despite all of that, his personality and his narcissism does get into the way, and he trips over himself still. So, yes, Trump is great, but Trump is also flawed and can make mistakes, and that's why we have to call balls and strikes on him. He's hitting home runs, and he's hitting 30 base hits, but we also have to remember sometimes he gets ahead of himself.
Yeah, I mean, look, I always say that there's a good and a bad about Donald Trump, and it is true that in many ways, Ralph, Trump, can be his own worst enemy. But I've never seen anything quite like what's happened in the last 3 weeks. I think almost all our listeners would agree with that. I don't like everything he's done, but I'd say I like about 80% of it. But this guy's acting like he knows, Ralph, that he's got really, 2 years to really make his mark on history and change America, because, 2 years from now, we'll be talking about the next election. So he seems to be, in a hurry. And the American people seem to love what he's doing.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever been a first, 3-week or 4-week period like this since Franklin Delano Roosevelt came in during the depths of the Depression.
Right.
And in many ways, I'm not necessarily comparing the two. Certainly economically, we're not nearly in that kind of situation. 25% unemployment, deflationary pressures, et cetera. But I think Biden left such a catastrophe.
He did.
At the border, around the world, the out-of-control spending. I mean, I would defer to your judgment, but I think a lot of the economy is a sugar high based on this completely out-of-control federal spending, and there's evidence that we really do need some significant economic reform. And I think the other thing is, even though I would have never said this in 2020, I thought the opposite. I think it was a blessing in disguise. I'm not glad it happened, but a blessing in disguise that he didn't make it in 2020, and that he got to serve non-consecutive terms, only the second president in history to ever do that, because when he got back in contrast, let's be honest, to the first term, when he walked in the door of the Oval Office, he knew exactly what he was going to do.
Yeah, he knew where that's the old saying. He knew where the men's room was, and he knew how to run the government. And I
even
think
the cabinet. You know, I know for a fact that the first go around, he relied on other people's judgment because he didn't know a lot of these people.
That's true.
And now he knows everybody, and he wants his people, and it will make a huge difference.
Well, I don't want to keep going back to Reagan, but Reagan also in his first term, you know, a lot of the people, as you know, John, because you covered it, you knew Reagan before he was president. But, you know, there were a lot of people who were, you know, never Reagan people who got involved in the Reagan administration, just like there were never Trumpers who got into the Trump administration. I don't think Trump has made that mistake this time, but what do you think about his appointments?
Well, I will just say that with Reagan, remember, he never had both houses of Congress.
That's true.
Donald Trump realizes that even though the Republican margin of the House is narrow, he can push things through. Mm-hmm. And certainly he has done everything from flatter people to bully people to get them to do what he wants.
He's good at both those things.
But I think that there's one thing here that we should remember. People always look at history and say that predetermines the future. Well, it doesn't. Just because most midterm elections have gone against the party in power doesn't always take the case. If a president is viewed as successful or his opposition makes stupid mistakes, there are midterms where the president's party has gained seats. And I'll give you an example. The House, the Republicans have a 5-seat majority. Well, the Cook Political Report, which got the 2024 House margin down exactly right, says there are 18 toss-up seats. If you divided them evenly in 2026, the Republicans would gain 2 seats. They'd have a bigger majority than they have now. I don't think it is inevitable the Republicans lose the House. And as for the Senate, and I think Ralph will agree with this, not only are there seats like Georgia, where Ralph is from, that are in play, but Minnesota is winnable. Donald Trump only lost it by 4 points, and he lost it only by 1 point against Hillary Clinton. And there's also Michigan, which Donald Trump has carried twice now. So I believe, especially if Gene Shaheen in New Hampshire retires, he's 78 years old, Democratic incumbent, that seat's in play. So I think Donald Trump may get a second win. Remember, Ronald Reagan accomplished a lot in foreign policy and regulatory policy in the last 2 years of his second term. He wasn't sitting back and doing nothing.
Yeah. So, which brings us to, by the way, we have a break in about a minute and a half. So Ralph, just a quick answer on this. But, you know, I was mentioning earlier this cartoon that we had in the hotline of two donkeys behind the wheel of a car, and it keeps going around in circles. And the caption is, the GPS keeps telling us to turn left, turn left, turn left. The Democrats seem to be floundering right now. They don't have a message. They're against even the most, popular of Trump's ideas. They're leaderless. You know, when Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is their guy, in first place in their early polls. What do they do?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a theory on that, and it is that political parties do not course correct after only one devastating defeat.
Good point. They may have to lose again.
It takes 2 or more. Okay,
so
after the Democrats lost in 80, and Jimmy Carter was defeated in a landslide, carrying only 7 states, as I recall. Did they course correct? No, they nominated his vice president, who promised to raise taxes. After we lost in 2008, did we course correct? No. We went with a standard establishment playbook, and it takes 2 or more consecutive defeats.
All right, Ralph, hold that thought. We got to take a quick break. We'll be back with Ralph Reed and John Fund. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I've always said on this show that I'm far from the best radio talk show host, but I do get some of the best guests in the business. And we have 2 of the sharpest political minds in America on with us right now. Ralph Reed, who runs Faith and Freedom Foundation, and John Fund, who you know him from the Wall Street Journal, from National Review, from Unleashed Prosperity, from Fox News. He is everywhere. Gentlemen, thanks again for joining. The thing that I think is interesting about our previous discussion about the Democrats, and I don't want to dwell on them too much, but John, Ralph is right. It took actually Democrats 3 losses. They lost in 80, 84, and 88, and they finally got their act together, and they got a centrist, moderate Democrat in Bill Clinton, and they won. They won with the moderate, centrist. And they had something called the Democratic Leadership Coalition or something.
Democratic Leadership Council.
And it worked for them. And by the way, I'm a fan of Bill Clinton. I think what he did on the economy was pretty fantastic. But I don't see that. I don't see any movement at all in the Democratic Party to move to the center.
Well, the problem they have is this. They have developed a self-reinforcing cancel culture. So if anybody steps out of line, they're going to be shouted down and exiled off the island.
The island's getting pretty small, John. There aren't too many inhabitants on that island anymore.
Well, look, if I were a Democrat, I would say we're only 3 seats away from a House majority. We just had some bad breaks in the Senate. Trump is going to make mistakes. So they're still in that dream loop, I call it. But the real problem is with the Democrats is this. They are a group of competing special interest groups that are parasitical because they feed on government funding. The genius of what Trump and Musk are doing these first 3 weeks is this. Ronald Reagan talked about defunding the left. Ralph remembers that. But he never had the power or the skilled people to do it. Now he does, Trump. We have that in Trump. And if we cut off their air hose, their supply of federal money, all of these NGOs, these nonprofit groups, these parasitical labor institutes, that basically, in the universities, if we can cut off their money, they'll start fighting amongst themselves and cannibalizing themselves.
Yes.
That's the key. Follow the money. And Trump
follow the money.
And Musk are onto this.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, one of the things that I've been urging, because we're very involved in this tax bill, we've got to get this tax bill done. And Ralph Reed, my idea is, why don't we tax these endowments of these universities that they're now lowering their tuitions? They're just massive storehouses of financial wealth that was never taxed. And look, I'm in favor of tax. I'm an anti-tax guy, but why should we be subsidizing these massive universities the way that we do?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all. And I think it's one thing if a major university like a Harvard or a Yale has a $1 billion endowment, and you need that funding for capital improvements
but it's Ralph, it's $100 billion.
I know, that's my point. But I don't know what the number is, but if you just take the top ones, I think it's north of $1 trillion.
Yes.
And I think at a minimum, at a bare minimum, Steve.
Yes.
And I'm an anti-tax guy and I'm anti-regulation. But if you're not using these funds and the income thrown off from it for specific purposes related to core educational functions, then I absolutely agree with you. There ought to be some kind of of revenue to the government so that the government can do what these universities are not.
Yeah, I mean, what's the joke that Harvard is actually just a big financial institution now? It's not even a university, or like
right.
That's secondary.
It's a private equity fund masquerading as an institution of higher education.
So I wanted to talk to you guys about advice that you would give because you two are been in the game a long time. I am concerned, John Fund and Ralph Reed, about the tax bill. I'm paid to worry. We have got to get this done. We have to make the Trump tax cut permanent. We got a president who has a high approval rating. He has a mandate from the voters. He's got a Republican House, Republican Senate. John, I am sick and tired of the Republicans dragging their feet, not getting this tax bill done. Look, it should have been H.R. 1. We should have voted to make the tax cuts permanent right out of the gate. They're making it much harder. I know I talk with, Larry Kudlow agrees with me. Steve Forbes agrees with me. Why is this taking so long? Why are they making it so hard?
Look, in 1982, Reagan's first midterm, we were in the middle of a deep recession. Unemployment hit 10%.
I remember.
It was very difficult for Ronald Reagan after he passed the tax bill to get anything else done. Donald Trump is not in that position, and I think we can avoid a recession. What Trump has to do is this. In this case, his bullying is going to be put to very good use. He has to go in front of the Republicans in Congress and say, look, I know you want to save these Green New Deal projects that are being built in your district. Ridiculous. I know you want to do this. I know you want to do that. I know you want to have SALT taken away completely, the tax code. And the answer is no, you cannot do this. I am your leader. We all either hang together or we hang separately. I need your vote on this. You will vote on this, and I will primary if you don't do that. Now, under normal circumstances, you can overdo those kind of tactics. But on something as fundamental as this, extending the Trump tax cuts, cutting regulations, and cutting wasteful spending, even if it's in Republican districts, Trump has to put it all on the line and say, this is it. I need your vote.
So, Ralph, I'd love your recommendation here because I'm pulling my hair out right now. And even some of my friends and your friends that are, fiscal conservatives, but they're saying, well, they're holding the tax bill hostage to get other, spending cuts. I don't think that's a wise strategy. I want to get the victory I want it now because, Ralph, the longer we wait, the more in jeopardy it becomes. So what is your advice?
Well, I think speed is critical. And you remember Lyndon Johnson's old phrase, he was one of the most capable legislative leaders we ever had. And fortunately he taped himself saying some of this stuff to congressional leaders. In his case, it was civil rights legislation. And he said, look, if you leave this thing laying around on the beach, it starts to stink like a mackerel in the moonlight.
Right.
If you got the votes, you go. Do it. You go now. Yeah. You go immediately.
Yes.
So that's number one. Number two, the other piece of advice that I would have is don't make the mistake that unfortunately we did under Reagan, where we delayed the effective date of the tax cut.
Great point.
Remember? The tax cuts were passed in August of 1981, and they didn't take effect until October of 81.
No, I'm sorry. Hold on. They weren't actually, you've got 90% right, but actually the full phase in and the tax cut didn't actually happen until October of 82.
Well, you're right, because what they did, remember, instead of making it the 33% Kemp-Roth cut, they made it 25, and it was 5-10-10.
Right.
We need to make this the deepest rate cut. And again, you know this better than anybody. The emphasis is not on the dollar amount. The emphasis is on the marginal rate. That's the prospective income they'll earn if they're entrepreneurial and productive. So get it as low as you can and make it retroactive to January 1 of this year.
Yeah, well put. I couldn't agree more. And John Fund, why you and I and Ralph have lived with the Congressional Budget Office now for 40 years. They always get it wrong. They use static revenue analysis that always overstates the cost of a tax cut. I'm sick to my stomach that the Congressional Budget Office is saying that this tax cut, the making the Trump tax cut permanent, which is the current policy, which is these rates, They're saying it's going to cost $4 trillion. That's insanity. I mean, we got more revenue in from this tax bill, and they're saying it's going to cost $4 trillion. What can we do about this? Why are we using this crazy baseline?
I think that Trump can play one of two cards at the end if he has to. One of them is simply say, you don't have to accept the Congressional Budget Office numbers. They've been wrong too often for too long. We're going to use a separate set of numbers developed by the Office of Management and Budget, and Congress can accept them. Secondly, and Steve, you can explain this better to the listeners, the first President Bush, the second President Bush was told, it is unfair for people to pay capital gains taxes on their houses or their investments or their baseball card collection or whatever it is, not factoring in inflation.
Yes.
And I think if Trump simply did that by executive order, and I think he has his Treasury Secretary in Scott Bessent who would do it, that would revolutionize the economy, and he can go to the Republicans and say, we're going to have a 1-2 punch. We're not only going to pass the kind of tax cut that Ralph Reed mentioned, but we're also going to create an explosion of investment and churning of assets that have been underutilized and not put into play by redefining capital gains taxation for average people as well as companies.
That's a good one. That's a high priority.
Great idea, John. Great idea.
Yeah, it is. And it wasn't a big issue for the last 25 years or so because we didn't have much inflation. But guess what? Under Biden, we had, 25% raise in costs, and we should do that one. But, Ralph, I just want to mention to you, and, I want to mention to our listeners and that what we did in the tax cut, because a lot of people don't really understand what an incredible, achievement this was. We lowered their business tax rate from the highest in the world to one of the lowest to make America more competitive. We cut small business taxes by 20% because small businesses create most of the jobs in America. We took most Americans now don't have to itemize their deductions, Ralph, because only 9% of Americans itemize their deduction, which was a huge simplification. You just check the box, you get the standard deduction. We increased the child credit for American families. Remember the alternative minimum tax? That's gone. We essentially got rid of the alternative minimum tax. I could go on and on. We allowed businesses to immediately expense their capital purchases when they want to build a plant or equipment or machinery to make them more productive. These things will all go away, Ralph, on January 1st if we don't get this tax cut done. And so failure is not an option. And if the Republicans, I'm sorry, I just feel so strongly about this. If Republicans want to lose Congress, don't get this tax cut done because the Americans are going to revolt against Republicans if we don't get this done.
Steve, you couldn't be more right. Look, we've seen this movie before, okay? Yep. In the first Trump term, what was the thing that most Republicans ran on in 2010, 2012, 2014, and 2016? They ran on repealing Obamacare.
Yeah.
They voted 61 different times in the House alone to repeal Obamacare. Trump becomes president, says he will sign it. We failed by one vote in the Senate, but we had a lot of drama before that. You may remember members of the Freedom Caucus refused to support the original bill. We completely screwed the pooch on this, and we were dreadfully punished by the voters. It will happen again if we don't not only make the Trump tax cut permanent, Steve, but if we do the kinds of things that you and Larry Kudlow and Art Laffer and other great minds in the party economically say we need to do to make the bill even better, and we've got to do it. It is not optional. It has to be done, and it has to be done forthwith. And if not, the voters are going to say, you ran promising to do this, you won on the economy, you failed to do it, and now you're out.
Yeah. So we've just got a few minutes left. Great points, gentlemen. I just like your reaction, Ralph, to what Elon Musk is doing. You represent the cultural conservatives in the Republican conservative movement, and it's always shocked me that Trump is so popular with your members. I remember I spoke at your conference. I think you had 1,200 people there, and they were wildly enthusiastic about Trump. What is it about Trump that that Christian Republicans and conservative social conservatives love about Trump?
Well, at the risk of sounding like Trump himself, it was closer to 4,000, Steve.
Okay. Okay.
It was a huge crowd, and the reason why they admire him so much, and why they so enthusiastically support him. And by the way, he won 84% of the evangelical vote last November.
That's incredible.
Is because while a lot of other people paid them lip service and patronized them and promised to do things like appoint pro-life justices to the Supreme Court, things like defunding Planned Parenthood, things like standing up for religious freedom and stopping discrimination against Christians and others of faith, Trump delivered. He said he would do something, and he delivered. And on the social, moral, and cultural issues, these voters know there has never been anyone, nothing against Reagan, nothing against the Bushes. I mean, I worked for them all.
Yeah,
okay?
Sure.
I'm not being critical of anybody else. I'm just saying, who else gave us 3 pro-life justices?
It's amazing.
In a single term. The answer is no one.
So, John Fund, do you have any final thoughts? We've got about 45 seconds, but Elon Musk seems like he wants to be the co-president.
Well, Musk and Trump did an interview that has been previewed already. It'll be on Sean Hannity's Fox show on Tuesday at 9 o'clock, in which Hannity says, look, the left is trying to divide the two of you. Time Magazine put Musk on the cover as president. They're trying to basically stoke Trump's ego and vanity and divide them. And they both sat and agreed with each other, we're not going to let that happen. And so nice try, but it's not going to work.
Right. We've got to leave it there. Ralph Reed, John Fund, thanks so much for carving time out on your Saturday afternoon, folks. Thanks so much for joining the More Money Show. I hope you have a wonderful President's Day weekend. And now we will hear from 2 of the best in the financial business, Bob and Ryan Payne.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Good afternoon, folks. This is Steve Moore. This is the More Money Show. Excited to be with you every Saturday afternoon on the More Money Show from 1 to 3 p.m. on WABC, the number 1 talk radio station in these United States. And thank you so much to my dear friend, John Catsimatidis, the owner of WABC, who has done an incredible job of turning WABC into such a powerhouse radio station around the country. But we have so much fun to talk about today. By the way, this happy President's Day weekend. Are we allowed to celebrate our presidents, our great presidents, Abraham Lincoln and George Washington anymore? Well, I think it's a new era, so I think we can. There was a study, I don't know if you saw, that just came out by one of the major education institutions, which found that 35 to 40% of elementary school teachers are teaching kids American history, that America is a bad country. We're a bad country. We're responsible for all the problems in the world. That has to stop, by the way. If a teacher believes that, they don't belong in front of a classroom. We have a public education system to help turn Americans, young kids, into great citizens. Well, how can they become great citizens if they think that the country they live in is a terrible place and that we are systemically racist? For example, which America is not a systemically racist country, as you know. We are probably the least systemically racist country on the planet. We are as you all know, if you listen to this show regularly, the United States is the first and only successful multicultural and multiracial country in the world. Now, that isn't to say we don't have racism. We do have racism in the country, but we've done an amazing job of unifying our country and becoming colorblind. By the way, the left had made the term colorblind a racist term. Did you know that? This was the terminology that Martin Luther King used, that we shouldn't judge people by the color of their skin. And yet now to not judge people by the color of their skin, is to be considered racist. But I want to just, say that I believe that George Washington was not just the father of our country, but the greatest president in American history. And we wouldn't be the incredibly powerful and good country that we are if it weren't for George Washington. We might not even be a country at all if it weren't for George Washington, General George Washington and President George Washington. And of course, Abraham Lincoln is the president who freed the slaves. I don't agree with everything that Abraham Lincoln did during the Civil War, but the result was an awfully good one, which was that we freed the slaves, and now we have a society that is rich and powerful. And one of the things that Donald Trump is doing today is he is draining the swamp. And I was on Larry Kudlow's show earlier making the point that Trump did a lot of great things in his first term. You know, we had great economic results when Trump was president in his first term. But what he did not do a good enough job of was draining the swamp. 3 of the 5 wealthiest counties in these United States are in or around Washington, D.C. So how did that happen? We don't produce anything in Washington, D.C. Well, we produce lawyers, lobbyists, regulations, pork barrel spending projects, but we don't really produce anything. We don't have manufacturing in Washington, D.C. People get rich in Washington because they come to Washington, and then they become rich because, there's an old saying, and many of you have heard me say this before. People who come to Washington come to do good and end up doing well. And it is so true. And for the first time, even, I was here even in the Reagan years, we didn't see, we did not see that the pond was cleaned. It wasn't. And we did not drain the swamp even during Reagan. I mean, Reagan did some great things, but we never did drain the swamp. And one of the things Trump is doing to drain the swamp is significantly reducing the number of federal employees. And he's just getting started, hopefully. And of course, the bureaucracy and the so-called, quote, civil service system, which is the most politicized institution in America. 91% of civil servants in Washington voted for Kamala Harris, not Donald Trump. This is the least diverse crowd of people in the whole United States is our federal employees. And now they're going to have to get other jobs. And we want a lean and efficient government that provides good services to the American people. But we have a blob in Washington, and we are finally getting rid of that blob. It's going to be tough. I mean, the blob is fighting back, folks. Look at how they're attacking Elon Musk now. Look how they're attacking my friend Russell Vought. He's the budget director, and his sin is he wants to lay people off. And that somehow, and by the way, some of my best friends are federal employees, and I have friends who have been laid off or took the buyout. And look, life is tough. This is what happens in the private sector all the time, that people lose their jobs. And somehow the idea that a federal employee would have to lose their job is seen as a horror show. But it is not a horror show. And look, I truly wish the best for people who've lost their job. I've lost jobs before. I know that it can be a very, very scary proposition when you lose your job and you don't have that paycheck and you have to scramble to find something new. But these people are getting 6, 7, 8 months severance. That's a really generous severance. They have $200,000 a year jobs, and we're giving them 8 months and many of them are just retiring and then living off the fat retirement that they get. And so my point is that I am excited about what Donald Trump is doing here. We are draining the swamp, and it's something that most Americans want to see. But the bureaucracy is fighting back in a very aggressive way, and the courts are, and they're running to their liberal judges, and they're trying to stop everything Donald Trump is trying to do. Now, I want to step back a minute. I do not believe in an imperial presidency. We do have three branches of government, and it is true that the Congress makes the laws. The president does not make the law. The executive branch is the branch that is supposed to carry out the laws. But Congress isn't doing their job. It's that simple. Congress doesn't pass laws anymore. And under Joe Biden, there weren't very many laws that passed. It was just basically they took over the whole bureaucracy, turned it far to the left, and so many of the things that they did were never passed into law by Congress. Now Trump is trying to undo that through his executive orders to say, look, you can't do this, you can't do that. He wants to shut down a lot the Consumer Finance Protection Board, which was never actually authorized and doesn't have a funding mechanism. And I'm loving it. I really do. And I am with the American people who are now more optimistic about the economy that they've been in 20 years. And that's according to the latest polls that are coming out. Americans are feeling good about things. And Wall Street Journal article even points out something I said last week on the show, which is, 8 years ago when Donald Trump was elected president for the first time, it was, oh my God, people were it was going to be the death of America. And they were running around like their heads were cut off back 8 years ago. But now most Democrats and most independents, I shouldn't say most Democrats, many Democrats and most independents are saying, let's give this guy a chance. It was so screwed up under Biden. Biden screwed up everything. He screwed up the border. He screwed up inflation. He screwed up the deficit. He screwed up the debt. He screwed up our cities, on and on and on. He massively increased our welfare. He screwed up our money system. And all of these things need to be corrected. Now, we had a report that came out this week, and I predicted this on this show. This was a lousy inflation report we got. The inflation dragon is not dead. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm here to tell you inflation is rising again. Now, I almost dropped off my chair, rolling over in laughter when Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House, and Chucky Schumer from New York, who is the minority leader in the Senate, they ran to the microphones and the cameras and said, ha ha, you see, Donald Trump said he was going to solve inflation and he didn't do it. Yeah, he's been in office at that time, he'd been in office for something like 16 days. And incidentally, the inflation report that came out was for the month of January. Trump was even in charge of the economy until January 21st. And the midway of that month was when Joe Biden was still president. And so right now we have inflation running at about 5%. That's way, way too high. It's a dangerous situation. Egg prices. Now eggs are a special case. And by the way, I'd love for one of my callers. I'll take a few callers today. We are live, by the way. We are in color. We are probably one of the only stations that you could possibly listen to on your dial that is live. We're not a canned show. We're not a commercial. We provide fresh information, and we will be taking your calls later in the show. 1-800-848-9222 is the More Money hotline. But it is an astounding thing that is going on in America, that people are looking at what Trump is doing. Even people who don't necessarily like him. And they're saying, hey, a lot of these things make sense. Why are we spending billions and billions of dollars on foreign aid when it doesn't actually provide foreign aid, when it doesn't actually lead to development in these countries? And you've created a basic system where people are getting rich off of foreign aid, but none of them are poor people in poor countries. And so that's a big deal. And I love the fact that Trump is talking about cutting. We're going to have a discussion later in the show with my friend Jeannie Allen, who runs the Center for Education Reform, about whether it makes sense to shut down the Department of Education. I want her advice on this. I think it's very difficult. Reagan tried to do it. Bush tried to do it. Trump tried to do it in his first term. Can he do it in his second term? I don't know if we have to shut down the agency, but we have to radically downsize it. I think we have to take a lot of the money and rule making. It doesn't add value to the schools. It doesn't make our kids smarter. We've spent $1 trillion on Jimmy Carter's Department of Education, and there's no evidence whatsoever that it's led to any positive economic or educational outcomes. And so what I'm telling you is Trump is galloped out of the gate. He is overturning the standard operating procedure of Washington, and I'm applauding. I'm standing on my chair, cheerleading for what Trump is doing. And I don't like everything he's doing. I don't like the steel tariffs. We can get into that later in the show. I think steel tariffs are stupid. And Trump knows that I don't like his steel tariffs. And he always, every time I see him, he says, there's Steve Moore. He's a great economist, but he doesn't like my tariffs. And I do like some of the tariffs, but I don't like the steel tariffs. And I don't think we should have higher tariffs on Mexico and Canada, because I do believe in the Reagan vision of North America being a big trade zone. But we will get into that into the show. We're going to hear from some of the political experts, policy experts, economic experts in the show, but we will hear from you, my listeners, because I say this every week, I learn so much from what you have to say. But things are good in America right now. I know the weather isn't good right now on the East Coast. It's supposed to be rainy and slushy and cold today. So what a good way to spend an hour or two and listen to the More Money Show and learn what's going on financially and economically in the country. Folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I hope you're having a wonderful weekend and happy President's Day weekend.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. Hope you're all having a wonderful President's Day weekend when we celebrate two of our great presidents, George Washington and our greatest president, of course, and Abraham Lincoln. And we should celebrate our heroes of our country. I know a lot of public education teachers don't want to do that, but this is the greatest country on earth, and we are right to celebrate the founder and father of our country, George Washington. Incidentally, I hope you're all getting our hotline, and if you're not getting the Unleash Prosperity hotline, why? Why not? Why aren't you getting it? It is free. It costs you nothing. And if you want to be the smartest person in the room and you want to keep up with what's going on with the economy, what's going on with finance, what's going on with politics, you can read this 5 minutes every morning. It's 5 or 6 bullet points, very popular. Newt Gingrich says it's the first thing he reads every morning. And so just go to unleashprosperity.com. and sign up, send us your email. I think you'll like it. I think you'll really enjoy it and learn from it. But if you don't, you can just unsubscribe. It doesn't cost you one thin dime. And by the way, it doesn't even cost you a penny, but of course, we are getting rid of the penny. Did you see that? We're getting rid of the penny. My next guest is someone who actually is a contributor to the hotline, works with me at Unleash Prosperity, is also a economist at the Heritage Foundation, and you see him oftentimes on Fox News and Fox Business, and has quickly become one of the most prominent economists in the country, E.J. Antoni. E.J., thanks for joining.
Oh, Steve, my pleasure. It's a very kind introduction. Thank you very much.
So we're getting rid of the penny. What do you make of that?
I think it's the right move. It's long overdue. And look, if we think about how much a dollar is worth today compared to, let's say, 100 years ago or in 1913 when the Fed was created and started devaluing the currency, we basically lost 90% of the value of the dollar. And the reason that's important, Steve, is because we are now, if we get rid of the penny and let's say we round all our transactions to 1 decimal point instead of 2, we'd actually have the same level of exactness that they had back in 1913.
Yeah.
So it's not as if you're really losing anything in that sense.
Yeah. Well, look, I agree with you, and you're right. By the way, we're actually losing money on pennies, right? Because they cost more to produce than they're worth. So that's a big problem as well. The copper and the zinc in the pennies are worth more, folks, than the penny is worth, which is, what is the term for that? Reverse seigniorage?
Reverse seigniorage. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Steve.
So I get that, EJ, but, it just seems to me it's almost like a surrender to inflation. But incidentally, a lot of people are saying now we should get rid of the nickel, get rid of the dime, get rid of, in other words, I worry that this isn't sending the right signal. And you are right. We have to get rid of the penny because it doesn't make any sense anymore. But, I am worried about inflation, and I'm worried about what happened in this latest report, which, as you've reported and we reported in the hotline, the headline number, the reality is worse than the headline number. Everyone says, oh, inflation's running at 3%. No, it's not. The last 3 months, it's running at 4 to 5%, EJ.
Right, exactly. So if you look at just how fast prices rose in the month of January, and then you ask the question, well, what happens if prices rise that fast every month for a full year? You're looking at an inflation rate of almost 6%.
Yes,
that's pretty horrific. Yes. I mean, at that pace, you're looking at in little more than a decade, prices are going to double. Again, these are really, really bad numbers. And
they are bad numbers.
Right.
No, you're right, EJ. And the thing that concerns me is that, I don't know if you saw this press conference, that what's his name? Jeffries and Chucky Schumer had, where they rushed to the microphones and blamed Trump on the January inflation numbers and the December. Hey, Donald Trump wasn't even president when that happened. But, the point is that I think that Trump has to really take the inflation issue seriously and get going, getting his tax cuts done, getting his deregulations done, getting the drill, baby drill, all the things that you and I know will lower prices, but there's not a minute to lose.
Oh, Steve, you're absolutely right. The whole reason he was elected, in my opinion, is because the American people looked around in November and said, I can buy less today than I could 4 years ago.
Right.
Forget that I'm making more money. My quality of life has gone down. My cost of living has gone up. And so the president was elected to reverse that, and he needs to do it ASAP. I understand that, there's a lot of things he's going to do and implement that won't take effect immediately. It will take time. Just like inflation didn't hit 9% as soon as Biden started spending. It took about 18 months. So, again, it's going to take time, but that's all the more reason why he has to get started immediately. Thankfully, he has, on several initiatives, already gotten started, as you've talked about.
Mm-hmm. So we have to I do think that the one thing that could derail the Trump presidency, and he's riding a wave right now, I don't know if you saw, new poll came out that Americans are more confident about the economy than they've been in 25 years, which is an amazing thing. But if the inflation isn't brought down, I think people will get discouraged because as you know, EJ, Americans hate inflation. They hate it. They hate going to the grocery store. They hate going to the gas pump. And I have a one-person focus group, and that is my wife. And she yells at me when I get home, you have no idea what things cost. I just spent $180 on groceries, and there aren't even actually a lot of people in the Moore household to buy that food for. So I just think that we cannot take the inflation issue lightly. We cannot just assume that it's going to go away. And EJ, as you've written and I've written, great minds think alike, it all circles back to the overspending in Washington.
Exactly, Steve. Again, 100% spot on here. They have to get the spending down. This is one of the reasons why I'm so hopeful about DOGE, for example, the Department of Government Efficiency, that they are really helping to root out all of this overspending. And I understand that they themselves a lot of times can't necessarily directly cancel spending. But look, sunlight is the best disinfectant. I'm convinced the reason why there's not more of an outcry about all of the abuse, the fraud, and the waste in the federal budget is because people don't know how their tax dollars are being spent. But once it gets exposed, now there is enough political pressure on the politicians to actually do something about it. So again, I'm very, very hopeful on that front. They'll be able to get the spending down, which, as you just said, Steve, that's the real tax, right? That's what you have to pay attention to. However much government spends, that's what they're really taking out of your wallet.
Now, another subject that I wanted to bring up with you, EJ, I'm talking to EJ Antoni, who is the brilliant economist at the Heritage Foundation. He also helps out me at the Unleash Prosperity, oftentimes writes for our Unleash Prosperity newsletter, which you can get for free by going to unleashprosperity.com. Let's go over the Trump agenda, because if you read the New York Times and the Washington Post and listen to a lot of these liberal economists, they keep saying, oh, Trump's going to cause inflation. And they point to his tariffs. And it is true, tariffs, if it is a standalone policy, if you impose a tariff, that would probably raise consumer prices. But I'm going to make the case to you, EJ, that so many of the other things that Trump is talking about actually would put a downward pressure on prices, at least the increase in the prices. And so, for example, if we deregulate the economy, that makes businesses more efficient. Won't that lead to lower prices?
Steve, that's exactly right. And by the way, I think we need to take all of these stories with a big grain of salt. When you have, like, for example, the Washington Post telling us, oh, Trump's going to cause inflation. First of all, they said that during his first term.
That's true. They did. They were wrong.
People don't realize import prices actually fell after Trump imposed tariffs. Now, that was due to a lot of different factors, but the fact still remains, right? And so you have that. These are also the same folks who told us Biden's overspending was not going to cause inflation. They were wrong then. But the other thing, Steve, is the fact that they keep telling us his tariffs are a tax and that's going to cause inflation. But then they also say his tax cuts are going to cause
it's
inflation.
Ridiculous.
What?
It's so ridiculous.
How can a tax cut and a tax hike both be inflationary?
Yeah. So so deflation. So he's going to do the deregulation. He's already started that. That will put downward pressure on prices. What about cutting government spending? Won't that lower prices?
Absolutely, 100%, Steve, for a couple of reasons. One, when the government is not spending so much, they're not going to borrow as much since all marginal spending is borrowed. And that takes the pressure off the Fed to create money to finance the deficits, and that's the cause of inflation. But the other thing is, as the government is competing less and less for products and services in the private marketplace, that reduces the competition on the buying end, which means it will put downward pressure on prices there as well. All of a sudden, you don't have to compete with the bottomless pockets of the federal government to buy concrete for a construction project, let's say. And now the private apartment building that you're going to build, perhaps, is now going to be cheaper because the government's not trying to buy up that concrete for a public building somewhere.
Okay, so what about the drill, baby, drill? That will mean more energy, won't it? Won't that lower prices?
Oh, Steve, you're spot on again, 100%. The more energy you produce, the more abundant that product becomes, the more you increase supply, the more downward pressure you put on price. That's Econ 101. And it's amazing to hear so many people on the left screech about how, it's not going to do anything for energy prices to produce more oil. We need solar and wind. Why would it not do anything to energy prices? Again, it's Econ 101. If you increase supply, you decrease price.
Okay, so I have another one for you, which is the Trump tax cut, which lowered tax rates, reduced our corporate tax rate, allowed businesses immediate expensing so they could, purchase equipment and manufacturing product. They could build factories, they could buy airplanes, they could do all the things they need to make their companies more cost efficient. We also lowered the taxes on American families by about $3,000 per household so they could make ends meet. And we lowered the tax on small businesses. Seems to me that should put downward pressure on prices too.
Absolutely. And Steve, the business taxes that you just mentioned are really important because that's where we get more investment. Look, if you, as Dr. Art Laffer always says, right, if you tax something more, you get less of it. Well, if you tax investment more, you'll get less of it. And the reason that's so damaging is because investment is where we get our long-term economic growth. It's where we get productivity growth, real wage growth, et cetera. And in this last GDP report, the final one of the Biden administration, we didn't have any investment growth at all. And so, again, this speaks to the lousy economy, I think, that President Trump is getting handed. And it's all the more reason why we need to get those tax cuts across the finish line in order to ensure that we continue to have that long-run economic growth.
So I'm talking to E.J. Antoni, who is one of the top economists in the country at the Heritage Foundation, and you see him on Fox News all the time. So, E.J., last subject, and we only have a couple minutes left, and thanks so much for taking some time off on your Saturday afternoon to join us. The tricky one is the tariff issue. You and I believe in free trade. The freedom to trade is one of the reasons that it's the core of economics, right, is the freedom to trade. Here's how I come down on this, and I'm still kind of formulating my opinion of these various Trump proposals. I do not like steel tariffs, EJ, and the aluminum tariffs. I don't think those are going to work to help American workers because you might create some jobs in the steel industry, but you're going to lose jobs in the auto industry and other industries that use steel. I think that's the evidence from the first term. But I am intrigued by this idea of Trump saying we are going to have a system where if you raise your tariffs on we're going to have reciprocity, essentially, that, every country has to trade with the United States because we're by far the biggest consumer market. And so if you want access to our consumer market, you have to lower your tariff to our tariff levels. And if you don't, we're going to raise our tariffs up to your level. I think this could work, but I'm a little uneasy about it. I'd like your reaction to this proposal.
Well, Steve, I really like it from the standpoint of this is very similar to what President McKinley did. And when he enacted all kinds of tariff reforms that focused on reciprocity, what it ended up doing was help sparking, or I should say help continuing America's golden age, which Trump talks about frequently and fondly. And it's in stark contrast to, I think, what Herbert Hoover did, which was a total shotgun approach, an almost random application of tariffs, which then encouraged reciprocity going the other way, where we decided to almost randomly penalize foreign countries and products, and then they did the same to us, and that helped make the Great Depression even worse than it already started to be. So,
well, that's this. By the way, this is an important point.
Approach.
I want to make sure people understand that the kind of the trigger for the Great Depression was the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which raised tariffs hugely, and it really did launch a global trade war. It shut down the global trading system and caused a long-term slowdown and meltdown in the world economy. But I'm not so sure that Trump's policies are in any way like that.
I agree. I think it's much more strategic. I think it's much more targeted. Again, the Smoot-Hawley tariff was cobbled together by a bipartisan effort in Congress, and it really was just driven by a lot of special interest groups. There was no overriding strategy there at all, and it was just thrown in front of the president, who really wasn't even sure if it was a good idea. Over 1,000 economists pleaded with him. They signed an open letter saying, please don't do this. And unfortunately, he did it anyway.
I did. There's a great book on what EJ is talking about, a very, very famous book called The Way the World Works by Jude Wanniski. And it really does show that it really was, Milton Friedman is right. We had way too tight monetary policy, but also we just shut down global trade. And this is not going to happen under Trump. I really don't believe that we're going to see a shutdown of global trade, EJ. Well, look, EJ Antoni, you are a national asset. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday afternoon. We are out of time, for this segment. We've got a hard break. Thank you. Have a great weekend. And folks, we'll be right back. I'll be taking your calls, by the way, when we come back. I want to hear what you think about how Trump is doing. What grade do you give him for his first 25 days or so in office? 1-800, what is it? 1-800-922. What's the number again? Mr. Producer, what's that number for the More Money hotline? Yep. There it is. 1-800, I used to have it memorized and I'm getting old. 1-800-848-9222. 1-800-848-9222. And if you're a Democrat, we'd love to hear from you because I want to hear what Democrats and independents think about these policies too. And we will be right back taking your calls on the More Money Show. 1-800-848-9222.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. We are having a lot of fun on a Saturday afternoon. It's kind of a miserable Saturday afternoon given the weather. It is it's pretty lousy all over the East Coast with kind of rain and sleet and cold weather. When is the winter going to be over? This has been a brutal winter, and apparently there's another storm coming on later next week, I think Wednesday or Thursday, dumping more snow. And if you're in Pennsylvania and in some of those other states, we are looking at as much as a foot of snow in a lot of these areas. So I don't know. I'm getting tired of shoveling, folks, and I'm from Chicago, so I know a lot about shoveling, but like spring can't be that far off, can it? It just cannot be. But if you have to be, inside, and you have to be doing, chores at home and so on, why not just listen to the More Money Show on WABC? Thanks so much for tuning in, folks. I have so much fun. I always say this is a great privilege for me to be able to sit in front of this microphone and listen and talk, but also listen to what you have to say, which is something we're going to do. Get your calls. I see that the dashboard is all lit up. I don't think I can take any more callers right now because all of the lines are busy right now. We'll take some more calls in the second hour. I'll get to Eddie in just a minute from New Jersey, but if you get the hotline, that we always have a cartoon, just a humor item at the end of every day's hotline. That's a good reason to get the hotline. It's free. Just go to unleashprosperity.com and sign up. But there was a great cartoon, and it's just so apropos of what's happening with the Democratic Party today. And it's a car that's going around and around and around in circles. And there are two donkeys driving the car, the Democratic donkeys. And the one says to the other, I don't know, the GPS just keeps telling us turn left, turn left, turn left. And that is so true. That's the Democratic Party. And I'm not a rah-rah Republican, by the way. I don't like Republicans too much either, but the Democrats seem to be so flustered. And why is it, by the way, that Elizabeth Warren, who's one of the leaders of the Democratic Party today, why is it that they're attacking Elon Musk? Why are they attacking these reports that are trying to find out where the waste is in government? If you believe in big government, and I have many friends who are Democrats who believe in the importance of government, and they believe that government can help people, and we want government to help people, provide good schools and provide a safety net for people and provide benefits for our veterans and all of these things, a strong military. But if you believe in a big government, then you have to believe in good government, because if the money is all being wasted, it's not going to the sources that it should be doing. And I don't understand why Elizabeth Warren is against finding waste. Why would she be opposed to that? Why is she in favor of spending $10 billion on empty buildings? I really do not understand the logic of this. Okay. Eddie, you've been waiting patiently. Eddie from New Jersey, what do you got for us, sir?
Hey, Steve, you're super cool, and I love your show. I don't have anything earth-shattering to say today. I am just so happy and grateful for our president, who I voted for 3 times.
Me too.
He's doing a fantastic job. I give him a triple A.
Oh my gosh!
Absolutely.
So Eddie, let me hold on. Let me interrupt you for a second. I think I would give him a B plus A minus. I don't agree with everything Trump is doing, and I'm not a big tariff guy, and I don't like the tariffs on Canada and some of but I agree with you. I think what he is doing is so exciting, and I have never quite seen anything like this in my lifetime of a president who is so, he has endless energy. Every day it's a new initiative, and almost all of these things make sense, Eddie. I mean, what has he done that you are most supportive of?
Well, I guess the coined phrase "drain the swamp." I mean, this is something that needed to be done decades.
I'm sorry, say that again. I couldn't. What was it that you mentioned?
Drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp. I mean, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm so proud of him, because this is something that needed to be done so long ago, and regardless of which party was in power, it didn't matter. It just, it's like a weed. Government, Washington's like a weed. You let it grow, it grows out of control. Next thing you know, you got weeds everywhere. It doesn't stop until somebody finally goes out and weeds the garden. And this is he's doing it, and it's fantastic. And I don't want to see anybody lose their job. I'm not into that. I've lost jobs over my lifetime.
Me too.
I don't want anybody to lose their job. But I mean, this is when I heard if this is true, you can tell me 75,000 federal employees already took the retirement plan.
Yes, they've taken. Yeah, Eddie, great call. Thank you. Look, Eddie, I got to move on. Great call and great information. And I agree with you. What he has done in the first 3 weeks has been amazing. And it is true. A lot of people are taking the buyouts, and they get a sweet deal, folks. They're getting, 7, 8, 9 months of severance pay for not having to show up for work. And very few people in the private sector get that kind of sweet deal. And, I hope they find jobs in the private sector, and I hope they become productive. And some people are taking early retirement. That's all fine and good. But when you're running an institution that's losing $2 trillion, you've got to start cutting. Okay. I guess, is it Kevin? Kevin from Boston. What have you got for us, sir?
Well, Steve, to you and your listening audience, happy President's Day. weekend.
Who's your favorite, Kevin? Who's your favorite president?
Well, right now it's a big contest to the man number 16, Honest Abe, on the penny for good reason, but the man that believed inherently in the Constitution, self-taught in the law, that held our country together towards such drive. I encourage anybody to read the Gettysburg Address, which at the time it was not taken. But again,
by the way, Eddie, Kevin, do you know his other most famous speech? His most famous speech was the Gettysburg Address, but do you know what his second most famous speech was?
Well, would it be? Astoundingly, they debated for hours between Frederick Douglass and himself, 4 hours with a small dinner break, and then again for another 4 hours. Imagine the attention span.
He was amazing. And also, by the way, you're right that the Frederick Douglass debates, but I was also referring to his second inaugural address when he basically, warned against, he knew at that point it was pretty clear we were going to win, the North was going to win the Civil War. And he said, malice towards none and charity towards all. And that was such an important message, and unfortunately was assassinated, and that was not carried out. But, Kevin, just very quickly, because we were tight on time, what is your major message that you wanted to tell our listeners?
Well, thank you, Steve. And again, I just want to correlate it to our Civil War strife. We are right now, there's not a person or a politician to lead as Donald Trump has. You mentioned about you're timid on the tariffs. Donald Trump, I believe, and trying to follow at such great speed what he's doing, but he's thinking about the long term. The long term, not the short term. And what's coming to an end is the Keynesian economics, the fiat printing. We are on the fiscal bridge, and what's not being said, remember how they would move up the time that what's going to be for the Social Security
Kevin,
I
got to cut you off. By the way, Kevin, you're listening to the show in Boston?
I certainly am, from Beantown, USA.
I so appreciate you calling in from Boston, and it just shows, folks, that we have listeners throughout the country. I'm going to try to squeeze in two really quick ones. We've only got 3 or 4 minutes left before we have to take a break. Linda from Long Island, what have you got for us, Linda?
Hi, Steve. This is my second call to you. You made me really think. I used to think about it all the time years ago when you were talking about the pennies. I always wondered who was the brilliant guy or female or woman who came up with that idea. If it's $2, we'll make it $1.99. So when you look at anybody looks at it, you see the dollar, but you don't see the 90. You think is it some change, right? But somebody came up with that, and everybody followed after that. Everything is something 99.
Well,
instead of
Linda,
$3, right?
It is so true. And it's a great call, Linda, because one of the things that I worry about a little bit, and by the way, I think we do need to get rid of the penny because the penny is obsolete now. But, one of the worries I have is that, you're right. It's $1.99 or $2.99. And, because that way it seems cheaper. The studies show that if you hear $1.99, you think of something that it's going to be cheaper than something that's $2, even though it's just the way we think when we hear the one, not the two. But I worry that, $1.95 and $1.98 and $1.99 is all going to be round up to $2, and that could cause inflation. And this is a little bit of a concern I have. It's going to give it a little incentive for the sellers to just bump up their prices that little bit. They're going to round up $1.96 to $2 and so on instead of rounding it down. We will see how that works. I want to try to get in Jerry before we have to take our break. Jerry is calling in from New Jersey. Jerry, are you with us? We may have lost Jerry. So, folks, is that Jerry? Oh, we lost Jerry. Okay. So, we are going to hear from Bob and Ryan Payne in just a minute. They are two of the best in the business, by the way. They're excellent financial analysts. I urge you to listen to their advice. I have them on the show every week. They help sponsor our show. So listen intently to what they're saying, because they are two of the best in the business. And then when we get back at the top of the hour, oh my gosh, it's going to be so much fun. We're going to be talking to John Fund and Ralph Reed, two of the top political analysts in the country, about what's happening, how Trump is pulling off what he's doing, because I've never seen anything so exciting in my whole life. We'll also be talking to Jeannie Allen, who is an expert on our schools. We're going to talk about why aren't they teaching patriotism in our schools? I think it's outrageous. I mean, we are the greatest country in the world, and yet we're not teaching our kids the greatness of America. We're not even teaching American history, for goodness sakes. One of the most exciting stories in the history of the world is the United States of America, and how we went from being a little tiny country with 13 little colonies to the most mighty economy in the world over the next 200 years. How we, incidentally, Trump is talking about he wants to take Greenland. Well, guess what? All we've been doing for the last 100 years is 200 years of our country is we acquired all the southern states through the Louisiana Purchase. We acquired Florida from Spain. We got Hawaii. We got Oregon. We got Alaska. So come on, let's get Greenland. There's only 60,000 people, but it's a strategic piece of land, piece of ice, I should say. It's mostly ice, not land. But I love that idea, and we should acquire it from I think it's Denmark that owns them. And then, it's good for our national security. I bet they have a lot of oil and gas there and other resources. So folks, I'm excited. I'm in a great mood. I hope you're in a great mood. We'll be right back. Now you will hear from Bob and Ryan Payne.